Well, hello everybody. So I've just completed a playthrough of Black Geyser Couriers of Darkness. And as I usually do when the credits roll, I tend to give my thoughts on things. How best to describe this? So it's definitely got CRPG in its blood. It's definitely it definitely follows the precepts of a CRPG through and through. As far as how deep it goes, it's actually fairly shallow. There's not really. There are a lot of different characters you can create, a lot of different classes, but when it comes down to it, when you the day-to-day leveling, where you're putting points into stuff. Really, they've kind of dropped the ball on that. A lot of the points that you can spread out amongst your character. First of all, your initial stats, you can never change them. So once you've picked your initial stats, your initial strength level and all that stuff, that's it. You never get more points later on. The points that you do get, you spend on things like outdoor survival, and arcane knowledge and things like that. Most of those deal with basically giving you additional dialogue choices and nothing else. And it's not really clear that that's their only purpose in the game, because they're so generically worded that you think they might be having a some kind of effect in battle or something, and they're really not. So 90% of them, you get maybe like 5 or 6 that you can pick from, and really there's only 1 or 2 that are actually worthwhile for the day-to-day combat. Like outdoor survival helps to not get waylaid as much, but you only need 1 character in your company in your party to have outdoor survival. You know what I mean? Once you start to spread those things out amongst your party, you end up, when you're leveling up, not really having anything useful to spend your points on. And with some of the characters, the hand-to-hand combat characters in particular, they get a lot of points that you can spend on weapons. And there's different weapon types, which is kind of nice. It's nice that you can have many different weapons. You can have the hand-to-hand stuff, and you can have the ranged weapons like slings and throwing knives and all that stuff, and they're all like spread out into points that way. So that part is good, where you can kind of spread those points out. But honestly, as you get to higher levels, like level, I'd say 13 or so or higher, you've pretty much maxed out at least 1 or 2 of those weapon traits, and you really have nothing else to spend those points on. You just kind of toss them willy-nilly at the other weapons in the case that you might someday use them. So it feels like, while I appreciate that they were trying to go for like a lighter touch on the RPG stuff, not go like super deep, it also feels out of balance and out of whack with like how many points they give you and all that stuff. It feels like it would have been better if every 5 levels or so, some of those points could be spent, instead of spending them on those character traits, they would be spent on your base level stats or something. They need something in there to just make it worthwhile, because it's really, you really get to a point where it's just like you're leveling up and it's not really doing much other than giving you more hit points, which is always a good thing, but still not that great. Dialogue options and stuff. Now, when you're playing an RPG and you're playing, story and all that stuff, obviously RPGs live and die by their story, and in particular, they live and die by their, the amount of player agency that you get in your dialogue options. And honestly, the game basically always gives you 2 options that are, we'll say evil, although not really, and 2 options that are good, and occasionally you'll get like a neutral. You know, like you'll get one that's like really goody two shoes. You'll get like a neutral good one. You'll get a really dastardly evil quote unquote one, and one that's like slightly less, like maybe snarky-ish. None of those seem to have much of an effect. I mean, they kind of do, and they kind of don't. You oftentimes will get additional dialogue options, like based on if you have bargaining and persuasion and stuff like that. But a lot of times those dialogue options don't lead to anything. How can I phrase this? Don't lead to anything interesting happening. A good example of this is at the very, like, near the beginning of the game, you're given a task by the king to go and deliver a message to a rebel faction, and through certain events it comes to pass that you have to negotiate with the rebel faction. And if you had high bargaining and persuasion skill like I did, you have all these different options that they give you that sound really great. But then ultimately the game just says, "Oh yeah, that's nice that you did that," but it changed nothing. Changed nothing at all about what happened next. You're just locked onto the path. If you did not have those persuasion points, you would still get a very similar outcome. I know this because I tried it, and it made no difference whether you succeeded at your bargain checks or not. And that's unfortunate because it feels like they could have had more immersion there. You start to lose a lot of your immersion because really your choices are not mattering all that much. The game does try to sort of blend in some interesting concepts. There's the concept of greed, and there's an overall world greed level that is supposed to affect the game in some fashion, but I couldn't tell you what kind of fashion. It's just the number seems to randomly go up regardless of what choices you make. And even when you make a choice that is definitely not greedy, you'll still get greed points against you. So really honestly, that system, while it sounds really good on paper, and this is going to be a running theme, it really does not work in practice because it doesn't seem to have any tangible effects on the world, other than perhaps it increases the number of there was an inkling that it increases the number of times you get waylaid moving from one section of the map to another. But honestly, I couldn't tell any difference. I barely got waylaid as it was. I had a very high outdoor skill anyway, so, and I had a magical warding skill that was pretty high too, so it basically very rarely, if ever, got waylaid. And when I did, it was usually by like 3 wolves or something like that, at which I could basically roll over in no problem whatsoever. The other thing that is really interesting is that there is a party XP, and the party XP system allows you you can level up five levels of your party, and every time someone in your party gets XP, it goes towards, not only does it go towards your character's XP or that character's XP, but it also goes towards the party as a separate pool. And as that party XP reaches certain thresholds, it unlocks perks that can affect your entire party. And I couldn't, like, it's also based on like the how diverse your party is, and whether or not, if you've got a lot of people who are using different weapon types. Like I had I basically everybody in my party used a different type of weapon, like ranged versus arrows versus say slings versus hand to hand versus unarmed and all that stuff. And if you have a diverse party, you supposedly gain party XP faster or something. I'm not sure exactly how that works. Or you some things are locked off to you or not. All I can tell you is that I hit the level 5 cap on the party, and it does give you some perks like like negative effects last a shorter amount of time on your party and stuff like that. But I couldn't point to it and go, yes, that made the difference in a battle. Like, I really couldn't tell you that was, that extra 1% was really, was really something. Which leads us to the difficulty levels. I think it's pretty clear to me at the end of this that I maybe should not have played on normal, like I did. I think it's normal or classic difficulty. I forget exactly what they call it. Because it was a bit too easy for most of the game, but then at the very end, like the very last 2 levels, the last 2 areas of the game, the difficulty just shot through the roof. And there wasn't a whole lot you could do about that. So it felt like, I don't know, it's half dozen of one and 10 of another, where it's like, I could have put the difficulty level up higher, but would it have made me enjoy the game more? I don't think so, because the combat really is pretty straightforward. It's just like, it's real time with pause, which is kind of combat I like. It reminds me a lot of the Neverwinter Nights and I think Baldur's Gate and Icewind Dale back in the day did that as well. But there wasn't a whole lot of depth to it. I mean, you were either slinging spells and spawning creatures in, or you were just waiting for your characters to stop missing and actually hit something. There wasn't a whole lot of nuance there. And obviously, I mean, if I had played at a higher difficulty level, I would have had to rest more, or I would have had to travel back to town more to get a full rest. Because you can camp out in the woods, but you get like a better rest if you're in an inn where you can, 8 hours will actually do something. Which leads us to one of the big issues of the game, and that's the loading time. The loading times in this game are pretty atrocious, and I'm loading it off an SSD. And the amount of loading screens you have to sit through, oftentimes the loading screen will take upwards of 30 seconds to a minute, to sometimes even a little bit longer than that to load up, and you're hit with a ton of them. If ever a game needed like a teleport to town scroll or something, it's really this game, right? Like, because in order to get around the map, a lot of sections of the map won't let you actually go to them directly. You have to go to a node next to them before you're allowed to go to the node you want to go to. It'll just tell you that destination is too far, which is just annoying to no end, because sometimes you just want to go back to the castle, but in order to do that, you have to travel through something else first to get to the castle, yeah. I understand why they've done it, because there are events that happen in some of those neighboring areas that they want you to see before you move on to the next area, but really, there were points where it's just like, I'll give you an example. At the very end of the game, there is a building that you traverse that is 3 levels, and then of course there's a an additional level after that. Every one of those levels was a loading screen. And so if you get to the third level, and it was pretty difficult because you're getting hit with enemies constantly. But you get to that third level, you finally clear it out, your party is just hurting like, really bad. Or you're just waylaid with a bunch of equipment, a bunch of loot, right? To get back to the town, you have to go through one loading screen to get back on the second floor, another loading screen to get through the first floor, another loading screen to get out to the outside, another loading screen to get back to the main town, another loading screen if you lost any characters to go into the church to revive them, another loading screen to get back out of the church, another loading screen to get into the tavern, and another loading screen to get back out of the tavern once you're done resting. And then if you want to go all the way back to where you're going, you have to replay all those loading screens again. It's really bad. Like I feel like I spent an inordinate amount of time just staring at loading screens in the game. It feels like they did not lay out their maps properly. Like there were points where it felt like maybe there are some larger outdoor areas in the game that didn't require loading areas. But then you get into like a small castle and it's like everything requires a loading screen. So I don't know what's causing that to happen. I don't know if they have scripts that are relying on that loading to happen or what it is, but it feels like it's not laid out properly. It just by the means of having to go back and forth constantly, and you're just sitting there waiting for things. So if there's a way that they can rejigger their maps and stuff to make it so that when you're running quests and whatnot that take you into a building and then back out of a building, that perhaps they could eliminate some of that lag time. That also brings us to the quests where, as far as the quest content goes, it's fairly middle of the road. There's some really good quests. There's some interesting mechanics in a few of them that I won't spoil. But the one thing I will say is it does suffer from quests that are a little too stretched out. Oftentimes, and again, it under normal circumstances you wouldn't notice it, but because of all the loading screens, it's very noticeable. Where the quest giver will say, "Okay, thank you for giving me this note. Now go talk to this other person and tell them that I got the note." And so you go to the other person, which takes you through 3 loading screens. Tell them that you got the note, that you delivered the note, and then they say, "Okay, great. Now go back to the person you just talked to and tell them that you need to access this other thing." And then you have to go through those 3 loading screens again, go back to talk to that same person again. There's points in some of those quests where it's just like, why don't you just skip that? Why don't you just take me to where I'm supposed to be to talk to this person? Just teleport me there. I don't need to walk the whole distance. You know what I mean? And there are points in the game where the game will actually teleport you to places. Points in the main quest where it will be like you'll finish some dialogue and it will teleport you to another place to finish your dialogue or to teleport you out of the castle or whatever. So they have the ability to do it. It's just they don't do it in places where it just would really smooth out the experience. Where you can just kind of like, just take me where I gotta go. I just want to finish this quest. I don't want to have to walk the whole distance and go through all the rigmarole of everything else that's going on, So they really could use to go through their quests and just tighten them up a bit. Get to the point, basically. And then There's, I believe this game was a Kickstarter game, and it kind of shows because there is crafting and brewing in the game. And if I were to, I don't know what their Kickstarter was like. I believe they had some sort of Kickstarter, but I didn't look at it. I don't know what shape it took, but I'm going to almost guess, go on record and saying they probably had brewing and potion making as some sort of stretch goal, because it feels like it was a stretch goal in the game, because it's just there. It's not particularly useful, and it's not particularly well designed UI wise. It's kind of chunked in to the inventory UI. You know what I mean? It's just kind of jammed in there, right? And that's unfortunate, right? Because it's like it really feels like someone just had it on their list and just like, all right, let's check that off. We got brewing, and it's just another check off the list, So what it would have been better, and I say that, what would have been better as far as the crafting goes is if it made more of a difference in the story or in the quests. There is one quest. I'll give them this. There is one quest in the game where you have to brew a healing potion to give to a mother who has an ailing child. And that's it. Like, that's literally the last time you ever have to do anything with brewing and potion making. And what's even more unfortunate about it is the mechanics of it are not set up to where it's particularly easy to like experiment with things. There's so many different ingredients that you pick up along the way. I had one character that was literally, her entire inventory was full of just materials that I picked up, and there was nothing to do with them. Like, I had nothing meaningful to use them on. You rely pretty heavily on the recipes in the game, because the way the interface is set up, it's very clunky. And trying to figure out a recipe, even though you can figure out recipes if you combine some things, it's so unintuitive that you really are relying heavily on just finding or buying recipes from vendors. And the thing that kind of blew my mind a little bit was talking again about the final the second to last area where you're going through a building. That building had a section that had had recipes galore. Recipes that were nowhere else in the game. And my inventory was just full of them at one point. And I'm like, well, I'm at the end of the game now. What good are all these recipes doing me at this point? Like, it's the end of the game. What does this do for me? I had an entire game and I couldn't find half of these recipes that I needed. It's particularly frustrating. There was a point earlier on in the game where one character wants you to find some potions for him, and you can buy. He tells you who to buy them from, but you could only, I think there's like 5 potions you needed, but you could only buy 4 of them. The 5th one you had to actually brew yourself. But to do that, you had to find the recipe for it, and the game doesn't tell you that, oh, you're going to stumble upon this recipe eventually if you just keep playing, right? You're looking around all over the place trying to find this recipe, and it turns out it's just like, it's in a quest area, right? And you'll just stumble upon it on your own. Which then brings us into sort of an overarching thing, which is the game has a little bit of an issue where it's very unclear in very important spots. The game kind of leaves you with an impression that you have the tools to do what you need to do to complete a quest, when in fact you don't. And the only way to get those tools is to complete a different quest that then gives you those tools, right? And it also does this with the dialogue too, where sometimes you'll pick a dialogue option that seems pretty clear cut, but then the conversation veers off in a completely different direction. And you're like, wait, that's not what I meant. That's not what I thought that meant. Or I didn't realize that this was going to happen. I'm thinking specifically of, there was a tree that was poisoned, and you had to try to find a cure for it. And one of the dialogue options seemed like it was going to be like, oh yeah, okay, you're going to tell the old man, all right, I'm going to go find a cure for it. So there's an old man who's like, you can either find a cure for it, or you can give me a poison potion, and I'll just kill the tree off, and we don't have to worry about it anymore. And I picked the option that I thought was going to be, all right, I'm going to go find a cure for it. And it wasn't. It was like, he literally went and killed the tree. I'm like, wait, that's not what I'm looking for. Right? So, and oftentimes it was just not clear what action was going to happen. And this is not a new problem. Like, RPGs have had this problem in the past. And a lot of RPGs solve it by just, in square brackets putting, like, this is what's going to happen if you select this. Especially when it's kind of vague, the wording, the way things are worded. And this game has a lot of that through it, where it's just like a little vague of what you're supposed to do next. Or it's a little, or it leaves you with the impression sometimes that you can finish a quest when in fact you haven't progressed enough to finish the quest. So that can be very frustrating. And we'll talk about the biggest frustration, and that is the end game. I won't spoil too much, but I will say that the final battle is not a good battle for an RPG. The final battle is the kind of thing that you would expect to find for a CRPG, at least. The final battle was the kind of battle that you would expect to find in, like, maybe an action RPG, or maybe a shooter, or something like that. Something where your character progression is not tossed out the window, right? With a CRPG, the main driving force between a CRPG and a JRPG, for that matter, is that you're taking a character from his little baby, soft, tender beginnings, to being a ginormous badass who can save the world and rescue the world, and has a party of members around them that have all been toned and honed and are ready to go. And you've been plowing through all these, enemies left and right and center. And then if you get to the final boss and realize that you can't do anything, like, all of that progression that you did doesn't matter a lick. You could be a level 1 person and you'd still be able to, theoretically, you'd still have the same challenge, right? Which was a bit upsetting. Again, I'm being very non-spoilery, but just to say that the final battle kind of betrays the fact that you have this well-honed party that's ready to go and can rock the world of any of these enemies, only to be essentially sidelined. Essentially. Not actually, but, let's just say the ending is was incredibly frustrating, and I can understand entirely some of the reviews I was seeing on Steam where it was people were saying, I liked the game until I got to the ending. Screw this game. I can completely understand where they're coming from. I sometimes a game will do something that, you know, just completely turns you off to everything. Despite having fun the entire time, it's just that one thing that just completely makes you hate everything about it. And this game comes close at the ending. I really hope that the game is still being worked on. It's still being modified and improved. I'm hoping that ending is something that they really go back and take a look at and see how they want to solve it, because not only was it a betrayal of all the progress you made in the game with your characters, but it's also pretty buggy. The camera doesn't snap to the action like it's supposed to at the end. There are, you know, when you first enter the area, you can't save, but then you can save. There's some BS mechanics that happen as well with some fire that I'm not going to get into. You know, it's pretty rough. As far as just general bugs, I've run into like a few things here and there, like just small things. Nothing that I would say was game breaking. I did find one game breaking thing on the very last boss, where if you die and then the boss, if your main character dies, you'll get a pop-up that says your protagonist is dead, even if some of your other characters are still alive. And if your other characters happen to be alive and a certain thing happens at the end, the game actually soft locks. It's not a full soft lock, because you can load your game, but it's a soft lock. You can't progress because you're in a weird state the game doesn't know how to handle. So there is that. That was the only like soft locky thing that I found throughout all my playthrough, and I have 36 hours in the game, so that's about how long it took me to get through it on normal. I did most of the side quests except for a few. There's a couple that just I could not figure out what I needed to do in order to progress them. Again, that goes back to my earlier criticism where the game sometimes just is too obtuse for its own good. But yeah, otherwise, generally, in an overarching general sense, I did enjoy this game very much. I think it's well worth the money that you spend on it. It's well worth the time you spend on it. You just have to know going in that it will frustrate you in pieces, because especially if you like RPGs and stuff, you will see it's very evident some of the mistakes that they've made here, and some of the things that just aren't quite finished. There's even a quest line for one of your characters that you meet early on that is not finished. They literally say it's not finished. It doesn't show up as completed in your quest line. It just shows up in a different color. It's something that they're going to finish later, they say. So you gotta weigh all that into consideration. And with all that in consideration, I think it's still a very good game to play. I would not encourage anyone to play it on a harder difficulty than normal. Like, even though normal is very easy, I would still play it on that, because you don't want to get hung up on it too much. It's one of those things where you want to experience the game and, you know, get through it. It's not the type of thing where you want to kind of keep grinding. You know, it's really not worth a grind, put it that way. Anyway, that's all my thoughts on Black Geyser Couriers of Darkness. Overall, generally, Really enjoyed it. I would encourage anyone who likes CRPGs to go ahead and pick it up. I think it's worth the money. But obviously, keep in mind that there are some issues with it here and there. That will do it for me. For those who will be watching this little review on the YouTubes, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.